the Shomron, and I believe that Rabbi Ginsbury actually went there on a US rabbi's tour with Rabbi Mervis. Can you share with us the philosophy and the life lessons that you learnt when you were in Eli? Because I remember it being quite transformative.
In Eli, the philosophy is one of leading by example, which they call the philosophy of Elkanah, who was the father of Shmuel. And in the Tanakh, he led by example through acts that he did of going to the Mishkan in Shiloh. And the philosophy there is of Rav Kook, of Torat Israel, Eretz Israel, and Am Israel. Of those three make up our mission as our nation. But I think the thing that struck home and made me really realize what I was part of was the way they taught what Yirat Shamayim is. And it was taught as your own vital importance inside something that is much bigger than yourself, which the army personifies without any explanation. Every soldier has his own responsibility, has his own post that he guards, or his own chaylim that he's in charge of, and yet he's part of something that is bigger than he could ever imagine. And that's what really gave me the push to go. Okay.
After you came out of Eli, which was more or less a year that you spent there, it was the day of your induction into the army, and I remember coming to take you up to Ammunition Hill in Jerusalem to hand you over at the army post. I must say I was more shaken by the experience than you seem to be. The question is, most people remember their first night away from home in a strange place with people they've possibly never met. Can you describe for us what it was like in those first few weeks, days and weeks, in an Israeli army unit with mainly Israeli boys as a boy from Hendon, or post-Eli?
Well, someone told me before I went into the army that the last time Jewish people were given a number, because that's what you're given when you go into the army, was on their hand or on their arm in the camps during the Holocaust. And now we were numbered, but we were numbered as soldiers protecting our state of Israel. That's the first thing that crossed my mind. The second is that for those of you who don't know, Ammunition Hill is a place where there was a great fight which was fought. And the fight was fought in a trench where the Jordanian soldiers were fighting what was then the IDF, or not exactly the IDF, but on its way to become the IDF. And it was a stalemate because they were in the same trench. And a soldier called Eitan, age 21, came out of the trench with his machine gun, stood on top of the hill, sacrificing his own life and shooting down onto the Jordanian soldiers, enabling those inside the trench to push forward and win the battle. Last year, I actually stood at Eitan's keva in Har Herzl, and the courage that he had to come out of the trench is, I think, the courage that I felt my first night in the army, and really it was a dream come true. It was also the first time I'd ever taken a communal shower, which was an extremely interesting experience, but it's something that we got used to pretty quickly.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't have communal showers in Shire Hall, thankfully. As a soldier, Sam, you learn to follow instructions. After 7 years at Hazikaron, you were obviously used to this. But how did you deal with taking instructions from an officer who perhaps was even younger than you were? Were you angry? Were you upset? Were you happy to follow the order? How did you feel?
I felt extremely lucky to be in the position that I was in. So if they would have told me to stand on my head, I would have done that. But the army is a dictatorship, and when dealing with life and death on a daily basis, or at least after you finish your training, there's no room for mishaps or for discussions or conversations. And the hardest thing to do is to go against your nature. And when being shot at, the hardest thing to do is to charge. And that's where discipline kicks in. And as we know, it says in Pirkei Avot, Ezehu Gibor HaKoveshet Yitzro. Now, you can't conquer your Yetzer without being disciplined.
Thank you. That's a superb answer. The next question, and maybe you've already answered it, was what was the greatest challenge that you faced in your time in the army? You must have faced many challenges. Was there one that stands out, or?
Two main challenges that were the hardest was after a year in the army, I had finished commander's course, and it was the summer of 2014. And the boys I had trained with for 8 months were crossing the border into Gaza. And I had to train in the new recruits of the summer of 2014. And not being able to go to war was the first extremely hard challenge that I faced. The second hard challenge was not being good enough to be able to continue in the army, to climb the ranks, and having to understand that there are more than enough things to do outside of the army as a citizen, which are as vital as those of a soldier.
Okay, well, they're big challenges and they're life challenges, and overcoming those will please God stand you in good stead in your life ahead. The next question. You're a lone soldier, which is a different position to many soldiers in the army, especially in your unit. I don't think there were many other lone soldiers, even though you had your sisters Tamara and Leora both married and living in Shiloh and Modi'in respectively. What message would you give to anybody from the UK who's thinking about following in a similar path to you, i.e. as a lone soldier, a Chayal Boded?
I think the most important thing is that one is going for the right reasons. One is going with a clear path and a clear mission in his mind as to why he wants to go, and not just because it looks cool, because it isn't cool after about 30 minutes. Don't let anyone turn you down. Don't let anyone take away your will, including your parents. They will be convinced in the end. And as we know, the country is a Jewish homeland. And you may not live in Israel, but as I see it, we all have the same responsibility to protect the country, that is the Jewish country, as world Jewry would see it fit for Israel to come and save Jews around the world if they were in any trouble.
Thank you. I remember during your period of service, you served on 3 different borders: the Lebanese, the Egyptian, and the Gaza borders. Can you tell us what you remember of those experiences serving on the borders and if they differed with the different countries?
Well, I'll slightly touch upon each three. I'll start with Shechem, because that was my first posting. I was there for half a year, and it's a very complicated and difficult area to control, because the enemy is intertwined and lives within. And protecting one of the holiest sites in Israel, Yosef's Kever, and enabling people to go and pray there was a huge part of being inside Shechem. Whilst being inside Shechem and actually protecting the entrance to the Kever, a boy called Yosef, who got shot in the back. And actually to this day, the bullet is still lodged next to his spine, because the operation would be too dangerous to remove it. And those were the sort of things that we dealt with on a day-to-day basis, including car rammings, stabbings, shootings. I was in a car inside Bethlehem a month later, which had been set on fire by a Molotov cocktail. But we had a responsibility to control the guerrilla warfare that's happening inside Judah and Samaria, and to try and keep a status quo so that life can go on for all the Jews living in the area. Gaza is already a terrorist army with tunnels running underneath our feet. My base itself was only about 100 meters from the border itself. Knowing about tunnels that were either being dug or had already existed running underneath the base. So the threat was a lot higher. But there is a built border, which makes it in somewhat easier to control. And Lebanon is a fully fledged army. And if Lebanon decide that it's time to go to war, then it's war, and it's no less. The last attack, serious attack from Lebanon, was what started the Second Lebanon War, which was the last serious war, and not an operation, that Israel had. And that's the threat when you're guarding the Lebanese border.
Thank you. That's very elucidating and all sounds pretty scary to me. I'm glad I didn't really know what was going on while you were down there. Erev Pesach 2017. Don't know if you remember, but Mummy and I drove down to see you on the Gaza border. At that time, you were the rank of a Samach Mempei, which is a deputy company commander with responsibility for other soldiers. We spent, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes with you before you had to go back to your duties. And we left in awe of your dedication and your professionalism. But what was more amazing was what you told us afterwards was the Seder night which you held for your soldiers that evening on your base after you came in from your duty. I think people would enjoy hearing about it, and would you mind telling us what happened?
Well, the people always come before the soldiers. So until all the Sidorim had finished in the surrounding Yeshuvim by Gaza, Nachal Oz, and so on and so forth, our Seder itself wouldn't start. Seder night is obviously a time that's extremely sensitive, and it's a time that the army expects there to be an attack. So until all the Sodom around us had almost finished, we didn't leave the border itself. Because the army can accept, but doesn't expect a soldier to be injured or even killed in the line of duty. But the army can't and will not accept citizens being injured or, God forbid, dying when it's our responsibility to protect them. So the Seder itself only started at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was a room full of all different types of Jews, irreligious, religious, traditional, and I saw it as my responsibility to give them a taster or a spark of Seder so that they could carry it through throughout the army, throughout the next week or throughout the next day, however long it would last each soldier. It was an extremely important moment in the 2 weeks that we were there before we went home. And I managed to teach them the hand movements to Who Knows One, which they either they thoroughly enjoyed or they enjoyed taking the mick out of me. But either way, it was a very special moment. At the same time, being on the border and still being able to celebrate Pesach like it should be celebrated amongst brothers in arms. And it's an experience that I would suggest that everyone goes to see or tries to feel it in some way or another in your own way.
Thank you. And for Mum and I, that was one of the highlights of your whole service, that in the midst of serving on the border, you managed to hold a form of a Seder, and who knows what influence that has had, not just for a day, but maybe for a lifetime on 1-2 other men.
Maybe.
The Israeli army is often portrayed in the media as being, in certain sections of the media anyway, evil, ruthless, killers of innocent Palestinians. How do you react to that slur on the army, having undergone instruction in how you should behave as a soldier?
I mean, the answer is on the tin itself. The Israeli Defense Force is called the Israeli Defense Force because that's the interest that it has. It's not stam, and for no good reason, that the word defense is in the middle of the title of our army. That's what leads our army. That's what leads all our initiatives. That's what leads all our operations, all our wars. If we're not under attack, then we're not going to attack ourselves. And that's the first and foremost, most important thing that everyone has to understand, is the underlying tone of the Israeli army. Apart from that, you can find lunatics anywhere. It's not a surprise that in an army that has 300,000 soldiers, there's going to be 1 or 2 lunatics. And if the media chooses to take those lunatics and portray that as our entire army, then it's ridiculous. And it doesn't portray the army. And what portrays the army is that the values that it holds, and the way it represents itself, and the way it goes to war, and the way it warns people, and the way it does its utmost. And some may even say it does not too much, but it endangers its own soldiers by going that extra mile to warn the enemy as to our whereabouts and as to our intentions. And I invite and even request that all those who feel that the army is immoral to come and see and to read and to be within and not just to stand from outside and throw rocks in. I served in the army for 4.5 years, and I continued to serve in the army as a reserve officer. And from my own experience, which isn't one of 2 days, I can tell you that the army does its utmost. And not only does it do its utmost, it is the most moral army in the world.
Thank you. Tonight, being Yom Hazikaron, and here in London it's almost night, can you tell everyone what you would have been required to do when you were serving full time? For all I know, maybe you still do it. I don't know what you will do tomorrow, but I know what you did every year. Can you share that with everyone on Yom Hazikaron?
Every year, every fallen soldier of the Israeli army has a soldier posted next to its grave, and we stand there. And I stood there for the last 5 years. In fact, this is my first ever year that it won't happen. We stand by the grave and we respect the soldiers that have fallen, and we respect the families that come to the grave. Sometimes there aren't any families, either because they can't make it or because there's no one alive. And we do our utmost to respect and to pay thanks to those who have already fallen, so that this country and this nation can continue to survive. Tomorrow I won't be going to a grave, which is different. But I thoroughly believe that those who have fallen want those who are still alive to fully understand what it means when we say "B'damai chai, b'damai chai," is that we are a nation that lives by its ethos and by its essence, and doesn't live to die, whereas other nations do. And while we're still alive and while we can still do and move forward and push forward, it's our responsibility and our duty to develop the land, the nation, and to be a light unto others. And I think maybe tomorrow isn't the right day to start, but without a shadow of a doubt, it's something that we need to think about tomorrow, and not only about death and sorrow.
Thank you. The next question about, people say if you make friends and contacts in your time in the army, these are your friends for life. I know you haven't actually been out of the army for all that long, but how true do you think that is, or is it a bit of a cliche?
It's not a cliche, but officers are often a bit of a lone wolf. And so that isn't the experience that I got from the army. But those who are with the platoon that they train with and then leave the army with, then it is 100% true. And there are huge support systems set up after the army. Particular units take a particular interest in their soldiers, and their alumni in essence, and look after them, including grants for university and help and work. And of course, reserves is really a big networking social when training isn't taking place. And it's something that I think is the glue within our nation.
Thank you. In the final months of your service, you were lucky enough to meet and to marry Rivki Portnoy.
True, true.
How did things change for you after that?
I think it made me a much more complete officer and soldier, suddenly understanding what people leave behind when they go to the army, especially now as my soldiers are much older than me and with fully fledged families, as a company commander in the reserves. It enables me to have foresight and to understand what it means to really leave something behind. And to meet someone with the same ideals, if not a lot stronger than my own, or something that I was incredible. It's incredible, and it only pushes you harder. And it's not a lie when they say, "B'zchut hanashim yatzanu miMitzrayim."
Nothing I can say after that. Finally, Sam, you've left the full-time employment of the IDF. Can you tell everyone what you do?
Well, I still have around 20 years left in the reserves, at least.
Yeah.
But currently I work the land in the hills of Jerusalem. I work in vineyards, plowing, and we're about to plant another 190 dunam between Jerusalem and the settlements around its area. And I'm proud to say that I've moved from, well, I've tried to move from Am Yisrael and protecting them to Eretz Yisrael, which is another extremely large value. And may one day I plant my own vineyards in an area that hasn't yet been touched.
That sounds like a fantastic ambition. That's the end of my question, Sam. I would like to say personally that Mummy and I, your siblings and all the family think you're a bit of a hero, even though you're still a very naughty boy. And we're very, very proud of you, and we love you very much. I don't know if you'll ever go back into the army again, but if not, I think there may be a place in politics for you. Because the government's a bit shaky and they could do with some wise heads. Sam, thank you very much. I'll hand back now to Rabbi Portnoy or
Rabbi Ginsbury.
Oh, yeah, come in, or Rabbi Ginsbury, who may have something to.
Daniel, before we hand over to Rabbi Ginsbury, Sam clearly showed a lot of emotion in that interview, and I found myself, maybe because I'm related to him, but becoming emotional. Just share with us before maybe any questions, your own feelings and emotions and the roller coaster as a dad, as a parent, I'm sure together with Sharon, that you no doubt felt, you know, the sleepless nights, the thinking, where is Sam now? What's he doing? Just take us a bit, if you can, if it's possible, into the world of the parent of a Chayal.
I really need Sharon to come up to sit next to me, but if you want to come up, Sharon. But before she arrives, I'll tell you how I felt. It sounds strange to say, but I never worried once. Partly because I made sure I never really knew what he was up to. So I just assumed that he would be safe. And we felt that he was doing the greatest thing he possibly could do. And we prayed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would protect him. And we were lucky enough that that wish was granted. And here's his mummy.
I miss some of what Daniel said, as we were incredibly proud of Sam. Clearly didn't like my food, so he left the country. I was very much into positive thinking, actually. I just decided it was going to be okay, because at the beginning I didn't sleep very much, and I sort of almost drove myself into a bit of a frenzy. Then I had to move out of that, and I had to say, it's going to be fine, it's going to be okay. And I think that's what pulled us through the 4.5 years. But I remember one Sunday morning taking him to a base near Netanya. There were hundreds and hundreds of Chayalim gathering to go back to the army on Sunday morning. And you know, when you go somewhere in Hendon or Golders Green, there's always a familiar face or two. There was no one. There was nobody that looked even vaguely familiar. And I remember thinking, gosh, he's so courageous and so independent to be able to manage this, not knowing a soul. And he's braver than we are, that's for sure.
There was one occasion where I did worry about him, but it wasn't really in the army. Occasionally, before he met Rivki, he would ring us up Motzei Shabbat, a bit bored. He was home, getting ready to go back to the army the next morning. Some of his friends had got married, some of his friends were busy, and he was a bit lonely sitting in Jerusalem. And I worried about him. In the army, I never really worried. There were always people to keep him busy.
So, Sam, in particular, a huge thank you for sharing with us your thoughts, and as well, Daniel, for interviewing him. It was very special to see you both have that connection on, albeit on Zoom tonight. And thank you both, Sharon and Daniel, for your comments. Just closing. Before we end, I'd just like to ask Rabbi Ginsbury to give us some words of inspiration before we conclude this evening.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Portnoy. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sharon and Daniel. It's very difficult to add anything further to the inspiration we've been privileged to have shared with us from Sam this evening, supported very much by Rivki next to him. There was something that moved me, Rabbi Portnoy, Rabbi Tzvi, you said about feeling a sense of personal connection. When Sam talked, prompted by Daniel, about that very special Seder, which began at 1 a.m., when many people are thinking about winding down their stone, you were just starting up. I thought you said about a very special Seder. And I thought to myself, very special Seder, did I hear? I knew, privileged to know, both of your grandfathers to a certain extent, both your grandmothers, and your grandmother Ruth still is just up the road to us on Green Lane. And when we think about L'dor v'dor nagi godlecha, from generation to generation, relating the praises of the Almighty, to see a father and a mother with such self-evident pride interviewing their son, in whom there's been planted not just the vineyards of Israel allegorically, but who is planting them literally like Choni Hamagel for this generation and future generations, but with so much tradition and goodness and value behind you, Sam, and Rivki, I know your family very well also, we can but be so lifted even out of our current sense of isolation and our current sense of concern and fallibility by knowing the strength of this day, of this generation, and that which is working towards. The way in which, Sam, your clear sense of idealism, of values, of love of the state of Israel, the people of Israel, the land of Israel, the Torah of Israel, and indeed, Daniel has mentioned, I did see that beautiful Mechina Latzava in Eli, very, very impressive. And to realize there, that sense of fusion of who and what a person is. And Sam, you brought this out so beautifully, that your service rising to a significant level as an army as an officer in the Israeli army, and now in the defense, the reserve corps as well. What we see from that is how it is possible for a person to bring themselves, their own personal gifts, together with their inherited gifts from family behind them, together with the values of what it means to be a caring, responsible, compassionate but determined member of Am Yisrael. And when you put that point over to us about Tzva Hagana Yisrael, we don't want to be out there with this macho image and having to impose things. We want to be able to defend that which is rightfully ours as an ancestral inheritance, something which has been promised to us, and to build upon it for the future. I wish you and Rivki every bracha v'hatzlacha in your life together, in that which you're doing for the land of Israel, the spirit of Israel, the heart of Israel, the state of Israel, the people of Israel, and all of us together, through the values that we share, should be able to move forwards from the challenging times in which you've celebrated Pesach, celebrated nonetheless. We are commemorating, we'll celebrate Yom Hazikaron and the end Yom HaAtzmaut, and moving forwards through the Omer, realizing that we count up towards a time, please God, of deliverance, better time when, please God, Uvo, L'Tzion Barina, we will all come together with rejoicing and gladness of heart, spirit, soul, and body to Yerushalayim. All of us, Am Yisrael, lifted by the commitment that we have, our commitment to the Almighty, to one another, to our land, to our Torah, and to all that's good about being Jewish. We should merit indeed only to have wonderful experiences together as soon as possible now in the present and going forward into the future, until we merit to rejoice together and dance together. B'Yerushalayim habnuya, b'vias Mashiach tzidkenu b'meir v'yameinu amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining. Have a meaningful Yom HaZikaron and a meaningful and uplifting Yom HaAtzmaut. Thanks so much. And thanks to Sam again and to Rivki, of course.